For years now, the human race has been toiling away with acts of war. Whether it be the Civil War, the Revolutionary War, or even the Infinity War, there are definitely many wars that we have come across as a society. And through that, of course, there is the act of escapism, which of course comes through terms of video games. And what does one man want to do? He wants to conquer. And thus, the RTS genre of games was born. Games like Warcraft, StarCraft, specifically from Blizzard Entertainment back in the day, really propelled us forward and made best in show gameplay, narratives, and quite frankly, just fun. And while I love playing these games on my, shit-ass laptop back in the day, and playing with my friend at that, I've been struggling to find a game in my adult life when I actually have money to buy games that really lives up to the feel of those style of RTS games. Single-player games like Gord, where it's much more about, a city simulation rather than warring with other factions and things like that, really have caught my interest. And if you're interested in something like that, you should check that out. It's a really interesting game. However, this specific type of game, I feel like it's been lost on gaming as a whole for a long time now. So last year when Stormgate was announced from a newly formed Frost Giant Studios, I was really excited. It started out with just a cinematic trailer, but the promise of what the premise of the game was, that was really hard to say by the way, it really got me super excited. So the baseline for the Steam page reads as this. Stormgate is a next-gen real-time strategy game set in a new science fantasy universe. Command mechs to defend Earth or invade it as the Infernals. Explore an ever-evolving campaign, group up for 3-player co-op, versus AI, and compete in 1v1 or 3v3, competitively of course, or even get creative in the editor. Welcome to the future of RTS. Now there's a lot to unpack there with everything that's there, and I've went through developer interviews and Q&As and things like that to get the most out of this experience. So as far as I'm concerned, unless super new information comes out, and I'll probably consider doing another video by that point, this is your everything you need to know and everything we do know about Stormgate. So first off, platforms. As of right now, it's only confirmed for PC, specifically through Steam, as that's where they're doing a lot of their closed betas with. Developers, of course, Frost Giant Studios, but what's interesting about that is that these developers are coming straight from Blizzard royalty, working on StarCraft 2 and Warcraft 3. And I believe that shows really well in the gameplay. Something that those games are limited by a lot is actually their unit counts and how high they can go. And when I get into the technicals of the game engine they're working with in just a few moments, what I think is really interesting here and a good sense of progression is that there seem to be a lot more units while keeping that same feel of those old RTS games. Now, as for the release, we don't actually know that as of right now. From the looks of things, it sounds like the game is going to be coming out in 2024 at the earliest. I would assume 2024, as they are having closed betas throughout the rest of this year. But they did explicitly state that one of the closed betas would be going into 2024. So, I don't expect a release or a release date before maybe then. And finally, for your last bit of need-to-know information, if you want to click out of here, is that this game is going to be free to play. But the way the developers talk about it, it's really interesting because it's not what you expect. Of course, the marketing of this game came around when NFTs were huge. They were very quick to state no NFTs. And there are going to be microtransactions, but not in the sense of like loot boxes or anything like that. But rather the terminology they use is that there will be opt-in purchases where you can vote with your dollars for new game modes and things like that. So with that being said, the first thing I really wanted to focus on was the kind of live service model they're potentially talking about here. So we'll get into the story content and things like that in just a minute, but the way the live service has been talked about is that it is going to be episodic, in the sense that new campaigns will release regularly. Also with these releases, outside of just story content, we'll have new content, heroes for playing in multiplayer, maps, and balancing changes. So pretty standard live servicey type elements, but maybe we'll have to pay for the new story content, and that's what I'm thinking as opt-in purchases, where the multiplayer stays unrestricted and completely free to play, but any extra story content will be added on. But that is entirely speculation on my part. They haven't been entirely clear what exactly they mean. But since we've got the business model out of the way, I think the first thing that we can really continue on with is the story itself. The Steam page states it as epic story missions. Earth didn't stand a chance. Our story begins hundreds of years in the future, after alien invaders hell-bent on claiming this planet as their own, poured out of the Stormgates and brought an end to the world as we knew it. Yet humanity survived. As the demonic infernal host return to unleash havoc once again, Earth's defenders must gather their courage and climb into their mechs to save the world. It's up to you to pick a side, harvest resources, build your base, and command mighty armies to decide the outcome. Now, I know this doesn't give very much at all, but I think it's really interesting. There's a couple things I really want to talk about here. First off, the Infernal Host, the alien race that has seemingly impacted our view of the kind of religious demon, as it were, as they have a demonic look to them. The idea is that as they've visited Earth once before for resources, over the generations of humans, they've been watered down in their visuals and, shown throughout religious text and stuff like that. I really like that story setup, or more of a lore building type thing. But for the actual story itself, Earth is fucked, where there's extreme weather, climate change, and overpopulation. So there is the Sigma program, a science team that is trying to solve these problems one way or another. Sigma 6, based out of the Arctic, had the goal to open a portal to another dimension in order to escape Earth. But when they opened this other dimension, that is when the Infernals came out and began wreaking havoc on Earth all over again. I believe that's a really cool premise, and that's all the story info that I've directly been able to glean. But one of the other things the developers talked about specifically is that they do have really interesting characters that we see, quote, glimpses of in the cinematic trailer with the archaeologists and stuff like that. But they tease that these characters will have great arcs that tie in well into the gameplay. So I'm thinking characters like Jim Raynor or even Illidan Stormrage from Warcraft 3 who have really interesting plot points that play in really well into their hero gameplay. But as of right now, that's all we really know about the story specifically. There's small little inspirations they talk about here and there. Of course, big inspirations being both StarCraft and Warcraft. One of the things that's really interesting about this game is it's really a blending of the two. The humans, the Resistance, have the high-tech, futuristic science aspect, while the Infernal Host are a warmongering alien group that travel from planet to planet through different Stormgates, that's what they call these portals, and their highest priority resource is life force, or anima, and that's why they chose Earth as a really high priority target. And those, of course, is where you get like the magic aspect. They're harvesting life sources. That's not exactly a renewable resource, if it were. So I think this clash is really interesting. Those are the two factions we know of right now. We don't know others, but we know that there will be others in the game. Whether that's added post-launch or not, I'm not really sure. As we wind down into some of the other interesting aspects of the game, I wanted to hit back to the Steam page for just a moment. And we have the first truly social RTS. Whatever your favorite game mode is, you can play Stormgate with your friends. Campaign missions, the ones that I've already talked about, can be played cooperatively, which is super, super cool. Stormgate's open-ended co-op, meaning that you're just playing, custom games against the AI, supports up to 3 players. And something I thought that was really cool about the players versus the AI in the open-ended ones is that there's a really big emphasis on role differentiation. Meaning that one player could be, really good at attacking the enemies, one could be really good at defending the bases, and one could even be really good at expanding and being the base builder. They kind of refer to that as the newbie role, if you will, if you're going to introduce your friends to the RTS genre. So I think that's really cool because naturally, I think when you're playing with friends in the RTS, you kind of have to coordinate in different ways like that. And while you're all controlling different bases, if it were, you can kind of work together, maybe intermingle your stuff together. And I think that's going to work really well here too. But there are 2 forms of PvP in the game, one of which being the 1v1, which is seemingly where the esports of the game will come into it, and there's already a huge emphasis for that. But even if you're not doing esports themselves, there is a way to make social connections through the built-in tournament system within the game. So maybe you can join tournaments. Honestly, I'm gonna make a couple of these connections here. Think like Fortnite. All right, hear me out. I know Fortnite doesn't have a direct tournament like this. I know some of them are just like cash cups or like individual cups like that don't continue. But, you can play and progress. If you get above a certain threshold, you keep going. Well, in this, maybe it's, if you win yours, you move on. So very much like a bracket-styled system. But the other form of PvP, of course, is the 3v3, which is a lot more lax, but of course, still very, very interesting. But finally, the last thing I wanted to talk about was the user-created content, or basically modding. So one thing that I think is really important to note is that Warcraft 3 specifically back in the day, was super huge for modding. I remember playing custom campaigns. I didn't play online stuff with it at the time, but I remember playing custom campaigns that in my head were canon. Some of them were story expansions made by fans. Some of them were like Jurassic Park mods. I remember all kinds of crazy stuff back in the day, and through that you'd get whole genres of games spawning, like the MOBA, and you've got stuff like Dota, different things like that. But as a kick to the head, when Warcraft 3 Reforged came out, Blizzard basically said, screw you guys, anything that you guys make with our games is ours now. To give another bit of emphasis on this is that back in the day, I did mess with the Warcraft creator maps, or the StarCraft ones even, and they were really cool. It was fun to make the maps. I wanted to make a campaign so bad, and I'm assuming we're going to be able to do that here as well. But the way they talk about it is it's going to be very similar in setup. You open it up, and you see the flat ground. You can start raising or lowering it below the sea level and creating the maps however you want to do it, placing resources, spawn points for bases and different things like that. You can craft your own custom missions, mini games, and in such a way that you draw the terrain, create scripts, modify units, and publish your own map for the community to play. What I think really stands out from this over Warcraft, for instance, is that in Warcraft you actually had to open a different application for the editor itself. In this, you're actually going to be able to do that within the game itself. That is huge. Another big emphasis is actually the virality of a lot of this stuff, meaning how are you going to, as a modder, get your stuff out there? Well, first off, you're going to be able to see what your friends are playing within the game. So if your friend's playing a mod, you're going to be able to see that too, or even maybe join. One thing that I would suggest if they haven't already done it is basically implement a trending tab. Once again, much like Fortnite, you can now go through and see all of these custom games, the spotlight ones from Epic themselves, as well as trending ones altogether. Overall, I think there's a lot of potential here. Whether it just be my experience with Warcraft 3 talking here, or just general hopefulness, I think this is going to be a really cool experience. And with the use of Unreal Engine 5, I think there's a lot that people are going to be able to do with this experience. I'm curious to see what the terms and conditions will be for custom content, but I think it should be really, really cool. Now, finally, that was the last thing I wanted to talk about, the kind of nitty-gritty of the actual engine itself. I think this is so cool. So while they're using Unreal Engine 5 for, say, the visuals and the sounds and the different type of settings and stuff like that, they have created their own in-house engine called the Snowplay engine for specifically the real-time strategy gameplay. It's meant for higher unit counts and lower latency networking, which one of those is huge for the evolution of RTS with the higher counts, and the other one is just a must-have for RTS and most online games for that matter. Another thing that's going to be allowed is mass spectating games, where viewers can rewind, instant replay, and fast forward back to where they were. They've kind of talked a little bit about how this works. I'm not entirely sure, don't take this for gospel, but basically the idea is that if you're spectating, rather than it being like a stream that you're watching that you'd have to, encode or do anything like that, the game is just basically retelling you the exact button inputs that player did, and then the game is re-rendering it in your game engine on your computer. So you're really only streaming the player inputs rather than actually anything else, like a video feed or something like that. And you can see how that works out in such a way that it could be very fast. The Snowplay engine is actually meant for faster iteration when it comes to game development. So even being so quick that you would never actually have to leave the game when implementing something new. And this can even help modders polish their game to the point of being a AAA release. Whether it be technically speaking, narratively, or somewhere else in between, I hope I've gotten it across that this game is going to be really crazy. While there's not been a lot about the game overall, I know there's probably going to be huge RTS players in the community that are breaking down everything, but I haven't really paid attention to that because I'm not in there. But if you have found this video, thank you so much for watching, and consider subscribing. I don't really do a lot of these games, but look out for that Gourd game that I mentioned, and maybe some other RTS games. Thank you so much for watching, and yeah, goodbye.